Hello, everybody. Welcome to the October 1st Wednesday Speaker Series program. This is a program that's put on jointly by the Mill Valley Historical Society and the Mill Valley Library, and in particular the Lucretia Little History Room. Over here, we have Natalie Snoyman, who is the supervising archivist in the History Room. And then in the back, we have Franklin Walther, who has a myriad of jobs, but tonight he's our AV person who's recording this for us. So thank you to you and to the library in general for hosting these sessions for us. I'm going to have two questions for you. One is, how many of you are members of the Mill Valley Historical Society? This is pretty great. Okay, good. And then, if you're a member, you are eligible. I don't have to ask you that. You are eligible to renew your membership starting now. That will take you all the way through December of 2025. So you can do that pretty easily by going online to our Join and Support page on the mvhistory.org website. Or next week, you should get our fall newsletter, and there'll be an envelope in there with information about how to renew. And, if you want to write us a check, you can stick your money in there. No cash, please. If you're not a member, so for the rest of you that didn't raise your hands, we have two things that might encourage you to become members. One is the newsletter. You won't get the newsletter unless you're a member, unless you find it laying around, like maybe in the history room. But the other, excuse me for a second. The other thing is coming up on October the 17th is our annual meeting. And that's a combination meeting where we elect our board members for the following year. But we have a potluck dinner. And that's pretty fun with, I think, free, I'm looking at Stella, I think a free social hour, 3 wine, yeah. And then if you bring the food, then we have a free dinner too. And then capping it off, we always have a speaker. And this year, Natalie Snoyman is going to be our speaker. And without giving away secrets, she's going to be talking about an unusual invention by a Mill Valley resident from the early 1950s, I think, and maybe some other things that she knows about by supervising the history room. So please come. If you're not members and that's intriguing to you, you can join at the door or you can join on that website anytime between now and then. Good. Okay, so let me get to tonight's program. Our speaker is Phil Rhodes, who has been in Mill Valley from the time he was born. I think he went away shortly for college and some other stuff, but he came back. And fortunately for us, he's always been a historian, even when he was a boy. And he is our main historian for the Historical Society. In addition to providing all kinds of research capabilities to you as the public who want to know more about your houses or your parents, your grandparents, or some event that happened in Mill Valley, Phil will find that for you. But he also, almost always, he knows where all the right maps and articles, it's a pretty amazing thing. In addition to doing that for you, for us, he provides new history. So we have a real extensive set of history in our annual reviews that we publish and in our walks into history. But Phil always finds something new. So if we add to things that we already have, or we want to repurpose those older materials, he'll find something really interesting and new to add to it. And then on top of that, he's a fact checker. So if we say something, he'll tell me, I think, he'll let us know that we got that wrong and correct it for us. So on behalf of the Historical Society and the library, Phil. Oh, I forgot to say, what he's going to talk about is here, Lovell White. And if you're a resident, you've heard of Lovell White. But again, he's got some new history. And that's what we're going to learn tonight. Okay, so.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, think I can hear myself too. How is everybody doing tonight? It's probably about the coolest spot in Mill Valley, unless you have air conditioning. So I'm glad to see you all here. And tonight I'm going to introduce quite a bit of new history. It's a complicated topic. Extemporaneous, as these talks always are, or almost always are. And so I have a lot of notes. So if you see me peering down and disengaging with you for a moment, bear with me. I've also included a lot of information, newspaper clippings, and they are kind of my cue cards for this talk. And some of them you may be able to read, others not. And I understand that you may not be able to read all of them, but part of the reason they're in there is not only to remind me of what I'm supposed to talk about, but since Franklin will kindly include these images in the video, they will provide references for people coming back, and they're essentially footnotes. So it's not 100% footnoted with these digital visual cue cards, but in good part it is. And I've been working on this for a number of years now, off and on. And the biggest thing, which will come near the end, is a complete historical reconstruction of the lead up to the creation of Mill Valley at the auction in 1890. And a lot of information that previous historians missed, and that you'd see bits and pieces in their work, but they didn't put it together, and I believe, put it together. So let's move forward. This image is the title image, and it's going to be, you're going to see it a couple of times. This time I'm simply going to explain why this is the way it is. It's a photo from the Mill Valley Library collection of a meeting, supposedly an old timers get together. We don't know where it was, probably in the 1890s. The gentleman at the far end of the table is Sidney B. Cushing, the founder of the Mount Tamalpais Railway and the part of the Cushing family that had the Blythedale Resort in Blythedale Canyon. Now, the guy whose back of the head you see is Lovell White, and he had very distinctive hair and ears, so I'd be willing to bet anyone a lot of money that it's him and not somebody else. He also liked to keep out of the limelight most of the time. But Sidney Cushing also didn't like to have his photo taken, and even though you probably can't see it too clearly, his expression kind of tells us that he wasn't very happy having his photo taken. So later on, I may mention a couple of these guys I think I know, but for now, let's move on. So we're going to start with some information most of you will know, and that is, and I got to get the pointer here. So this is Richardson Bay, Golden Gate, the Pacific Ocean, Tiburon Peninsula, and this brown area is what was called the Rancho Sausalito, later the Throckmorton Ranch or Throckmorton Rancho. And I'm usually going to use the term Throckmorton. And then all these little squares, this is an 1892 map, all these little squares don't mean anything to this talk, but they were underwater lots that were up for sale. So you can see that they were already thinking about completely filling in Richardson Bay and the water around the Tiburon Peninsula. Fortunately, most of this never happened. Now we're going to just zoom in, and the area circled by green is the original Mill Valley, and you can see Eastland and Millwood, which are the first two subdivisions of Mill Valley. And then the red outlined area is a triangle of public land that was between the Throckmorton Ranch and the Corte Madera Ranch, which, let me go back again. That Corte Madera del Presidio Rancho was the John Reed Rancho. So you have, on one side of Mill Valley, one rancho, and the other side of the other rancho. So This public land went on an 1873 map, and a guy named John Cushing heard about it, and he snapped up a good chunk of it and got it patented through the U.S. government. So the left hand or western side of that became the Blythedale lands and what would be the Blythedale Resort, which was opened 150 years ago. And our next speaker, Tim Wood, in November, will be talking about that. So we're going to move far, far away to the Ohio River. This is the town of Wheeling, West Virginia. And you'll see a couple of typical riverboats of the time. And one of the things I like about this picture is you will see the Wheeling Suspension Bridge, which was built in 1849, and for 2 years it was the longest span suspension bridge in the world. So it reminds me of our Golden Gate Bridge. And it turns out that a whole bunch of the people who influenced Lovell White and Laura White came from a very small area on the Ohio River upstream from Wheeling. So we're going to go in closer. You can see Wheeling circled in red and that little green finger sticking up, which is now called the West Virginia Panhandle. And it was then called the Virginia, it was then Virginia and the Virginia Panhandle. So after the Revolutionary War, you had what was called the Northwest Territory. And the first part of that to become a state was Kentucky. And that was a slave state. And so about 20 miles upstream from Wheeling, a guy named Bezaleel Wells, about 1897, subdivided land and established the town of Steubenville, named after a German named Steuben who had a fort there. And this ties in with our history because one of the first buyers was a guy named William Sharon. You'll see him down at the bottom there. And he was the grandfather of two people who will enter into our story later on. And Bezaleel Wells built one of the first steamboats on the Ohio River. It was launched from the Ohio side of the Ohio River and shot across the river, hit the bank on the other side, and they built the chimney of brick. Okay. It didn't turn out very well. It was replaced with iron. But it turns out that the same company who built this early steamboat also built the steamboats that were William Ralston, who I will talk about, who was Lovell White's great enabler later on. So this is a view of Wellsville, Ohio, which is another 20 miles upstream, another about 40 miles from Wheeling. And Bezaleel Wells' cousin, William Wells, purchased 304 acres here in 1897. And initially, he had to keep his family in a fort on the Virginia side because of Indian wars going on. And he would cross the river in a canoe with his horse swimming beside him. And then he had a plow over here on this bench where they later built the town, and he would farm his crops. So here's a picture of Wellsville is off to the right, the railroad, which was opened in 1852, which Lincoln came on, both going to his inauguration and to his grave a few years later, and the Ohio River on the left. The area is rather mountainous and has some resemblance to Marin County. So now we're going to zoom in on this part of the history. So at the bottom, you'll see Wellsville. This is the Ohio River. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is a little bit off here to the right. And you have William Wells establishing Wellsville, and in 1823 or 1824, they laid out a town site. Now, at the same time, in the early 1800s, Laura Lyons White family were settling in the same area. Her grandparents, Jonathan Lyon Sr. and Elizabeth Davids, were married in, this is all Columbia County. And I'll show you, there's your miles. So this is about 10 miles north of Wellsville. And her grandparents were married here about 1804. And her mother, Laura's mother, Eliza Bonner, was born here. Now, Laura Lyon White's mother was, I would call a proto-liberal, like Laura Lyon White was. She used her maiden name as her middle name, and Laura's mother, Eliza, went by Eliza Bonner Lyon, just as Laura was Laura Lyon White. Now, Laura's father was born over here in neighboring Beaver County, Pennsylvania. This is the Pennsylvania line. So, and Laura's relative, Robert Allen, who we'll talk a good bit about because he's very important in a lot of respects, was born up here at West Point. And ironically enough, he graduated from the military school, West Point. Okay, thank you. I don't know if we can raise it anymore. Let's see. I don't know if this does any better. Okay, let's try that. And thank you for mentioning it. I appreciate that. So Robert Allen was born here up at West Point and was born about 1811. Now, Wellsville became a town about 1824, and in 1832, the father of William Ralston, Robert Ralston, settled in Wellsville. William was 6 years old. He was born in 1826. And William grew up in Wellsville and had a wonderful childhood. I'm just curious if I missed something here. No, it comes later on. Sorry about that. Again, it's complicated. So William Ralston grew up in Wellsville, and okay, here we go. So William Ralston would always talk about his childhood here. He had a very good childhood. The Wells family, the owners of the town, were very progressive. And one of the first instances is that William Wells in 1800 was one of the first integrated schools west of the Ohio River on a nearby farm on the Ohio side, and it was still the Northwest Territory on the farm of let's see where it is. It should be Robert Dobbins Farm. And so William Wells had 5 kids, and his neighbor, Edward DeVore, who was a free black man, had 4 kids, and they pooled their money and established this school. Now, the interesting thing is I later looked at Edward DeVore's will, which he signed with an X. So Edward and his wife had the foresight to get their kids educated. And as we really find, it's education that helps people move forward in this world. And here's a rendition of the Edward DeVore farmhouse. It was built of stone, and it survived about 140 years until the family had left it, and it finally collapsed. But this is a mural at the Wellsville on the edge of the town. A lawnmower had come through when I took this picture and sprayed grass clippings all over it, which when dried and obscured it. But you can see Edward at the right there. Hopefully you can see him at the door motioning these escaped slaves. This was the Underground Railroad to go into his house. And the Underground Railroad was very, very active in this area. But the fact that there was a progressive attitude there made Wellsville an integrated community. And William Ralston grew up with black kids, and he had a very positive feeling toward black people through his entire life, and he would always employ them when he could. With the challenge that, especially a lot of his hiring was done was before or immediately after the Civil War. And I should mention that one of the things that one of the Wells family wrote about in a book published in 1824, they made the point that it was against the law in the South to teach slaves to read and write. So this Wells author made the point, he said, white missionaries are going to sub-Saharan Africa and teaching black kids how to read and write, and they're risking their lives to do that. But in the United States, it was against the law. Now, free blacks, of which there were a lot, and this was near Pennsylvania, and after the Civil War, after the Revolutionary War, the state of Pennsylvania abolished slavery, so the slaves there were freed, although it was a gradual process. But the Wellsville area became a main conduit on the Underground Railway, and the Wells family was a big part of that, and we even have firsthand accounts from Wells family members. This is a closer view of that. Now I'm going to move on to William Ralston, who probably was the most important person in the lives of Lovell and Laura White. If it were not for him, there's a good chance we would not be here today. We would not have a Mill Valley as we would know it. We would not have a Golden Gate Recreation Area or a Mount Tamalpais State Park. And going forward, I will try to offer more evidence of that. But he was born in Ohio, not in Wellsville, but moved to Wellsville, as I mentioned, when he was 6. 4 hard volume books have been written on him. This was the most recent in the 1970s. And he was a guy who felt nothing really was impossible. And then there's 3 here I'm going to show quickly that were published in the 1930s. Interesting that 3 books on him would be published in the 1930s, which was a period when there was a lot of interest in progressive businessmen, which is what he was. This was my grandfather's favorite book. And after he read this, or maybe before, he became a customer of Ralston's Bank of California and remained so until he died. This is a 3rd book. And Ralston was called the man who built San Francisco, and of course that's debatable. But he was a pretty incredible person. So here's San Francisco between 1875 and 1880. And this is a view from the South of Market area looking northwest. Twin Peaks would be, if I get my pointer here, wrong one, up here. And let's see, Nob Hill, and I get this here. Anyway, you see that hill off to the right with a pointy thing on top? That's Nob Hill with the Hopkins mansion at the top, and Hopkins was one of the big 4 who built the Transcontinental Railway. Now there's this oversized building in the middle of the picture. What the heck is that? Well, that is the Palace Hotel, which was the brainchild of William Ralston. He was very, very proud of California and San Francisco, and before he died, he conceived and started construction on this. It was built from about 1870 and finished in 1875. It cost $5 to $7 million, which doesn't sound like much, but the Brooklyn Bridge, which was being built at the same time, cost $15.5 million. And some would say that that cost $1 million per floor. Now, here's a picture taken on April 17th, 1906. It's from the opposite direction. The previous one is taken looking northwest. This one is taken looking southeast. So this is taken probably from up on the side of Nob Hill. And there's the Palace Hotel. So what happened is when Ralston built the Palace Hotel, the downtown San Francisco was some blocks away. But because the hotel was so incredible and such a draw, the downtown started being built around it. And so it gradually became swallowed up, and newspapers were big. That's the Chronicle building, and that's the Call building, which is a now gone newspaper. Now, something happened the day after April 17th, 1906. So a day later, this was all gone. And the Palace Hotel, if I'm probably taking too much time here, they had their own cistern in the basement, which held close to 1 million gallons, in their own pumping system. And they fought to keep the fire off it for hours and hours. They sprayed water on neighboring buildings, but they ultimately ran out. So I'm going to talk about, I'm not going to go into a lot of William Ralston's life, but I am going to mention that William Ralston became a riverboat captain before he came to California in the gold rush, and one of his steamboat mates was a guy named William O'Hara, and I heard about him from Hillary Collier, who's my ranger boss at Mount Tamalpais State Park. And I just wanted to stick in a couple of pages here on him. He was also a black man who, in part because from what he learned from William Ralston, became very prosperous in California. And just another page where they're mentioning Ralston. So William Ralston was very strongly anti-slavery. He was a Democrat. He was an anti-slavery Democrat before the Civil War. But as the war ramped up, this is on Washington's birthday in 1861 on Market Street in San Francisco. It's a pro-union rally. Ralston is in the group up there on the podium. I think he gave a talk, even though he was very shy about that. But Ralston played a considerable role during the Civil War when California did a lot for the Union. So this is where I kind of throw in a little bit on Lovell White, where it's just basically explaining that Lovell White was Ralston's personal secretary. He was the man that you had to, Lovell White was the guy you had to go through to see William Ralston and Ralston's office in the Bank of California. And so this tells a little bit about some of what I'll explain later on. And the interesting thing is that after Lovell White left Ralston, basically White was replaced with a black employee of Ralston's as the secretary or greeter. And Ralston typically had a line of people in his office wanting help. Poor people would come, people down on their luck, and usually he would find a way to help them, and he would always tell them, keep it secret, don't tell anybody. And partly because of that, we don't know a lot about all the things we did, and it's sometimes by happenstance we do find out. So here's again, the Palace Hotel, which after William Ralston died in 1875, it was taken over by William Sharon, who was one of the grandchildren of the guy I mentioned at the beginning, back in Steubenville, Ohio. And William Sharon, who was William Ralston's main partner, his cousin was A.D. Sharon, who became the proprietor of the hotel. Now, the interesting thing is that the A.D. stands for Alexander Dumas. Now, Alexander Dumas was a black French writer who was very popular, but also had some issues with racism. And it was interesting that Sharon was named after this guy. In the front of the Palace Hotel, soon after it was built, a guy named George Turner Marsh opened his storefront. And Marsh, as some of you may know, became a prominent person in Mill Valley history. Now, here's a picture on the top floor under the skylight in the Palace Hotel. So one thing is that they did was they hired a black staff. And this, we don't know for sure. It was probably William Ralston who wanted this, but apparently William and Alexander Sharon were also not particularly racist. Here's another interesting picture at the same level. Now, the staff, there was actually a black newspaper in San Francisco at the time, and the newspaper reported that the staff at the hotel were treated very well, and they were given their own banquet for Christmas banquet. They said the tables were loaded down with gourmet stuff. Unfortunately, as Jim Crow came in and laws in the South in the 1880s and 1890s, and it started a sea chain of racism in the United States, which permeated the entire country. And in the 1890s, the entire black staff was let go. And then the other picture I showed you was April 17th, and this is April 18th, after they ran out of water. Now we're going to move to I've talked about one group of progenitors, or whatever you call it. Now I'm going to talk about another family. This is Charleston, South Carolina. And it was a major point when they were still bringing in slaves from Africa. It was a major port where the slave ships arrived. And of course, there were a lot of selling of slaves in Charleston. So a Dutch author, and I'm going to look at my notes for pronunciation here. Give me a moment. Annegette van der Zaal, about 5 years ago, published this Dutch Book of the Week. It's in Dutch. She's probably the Netherlands' most famous writer. She's had many, many bestsellers, and she's had a number of her books published in United States, translated into English. So this is a book she wrote on Juliet Magnan and Leon Herkenrath. And it was basically a story of how this Dutch fellow named Leon Herkenrath met this young slave girl named Juliet Magnan, who was owned by a guy named Magnan, and that when Leon was very ill, she nursed him back to health. And after that, they formed a personal bond. And eventually, he did all he really could do at that time and purchased her for $1,000 and then married her. And they had quite a few children, which we'll get to. So this story was quite intriguing to Annegетte's American publisher. And so she agreed to write a book in English, thinking it would be a good seller in the United States. And it's basically a history of the family from 1820 up to the present. And unfortunately, after that first book was published, there was a George Floyd tragedy, and a lot of other things happened which caused the publisher to become shy about having it, so it was published only in Dutch. This is the first cover, and then this is the later cover. It sold over 100,000 copies in the Netherlands, which based on population would be over 2 million. So now I'm showing you a picture of the family. You see Juliet, well, she's called McCormick. Her original owner was named Magnan, but she was a mixed race. Apparently her father was a white guy named McCormick. And then here's Leon Herkenrath. And so she was quite young when they married. And our first child was Virginie, who will enter more in our story. And then they had quite a few more. So the first children were born in South Carolina, but because of the laws, they couldn't get them schooled in South Carolina. So the family moved back to the Netherlands, and the kids grew up in the Netherlands. So basically, here's the DeFremery family, and you have, let's see here. So I showed you Virginia in the last image. She was the oldest child. And under the laws, if you purchased a female slave and you gave her children were automatically your slaves. So technically speaking, Virginie Herkenrath was born a slave. She eventually met and married James DeFremery, who was one of Lovell White's main business partners. And then, whoops, okay, where am I going here? Okay, I need to go back. Okay, so, this is weird. Okay, I'm sorry. So Jacobus was James' original name, and he went by James here. He had a brother named William DeFremery. William DeFremery became involved in Mill Valley and was a director of the Mount Temple Pius Railway for many years. And he married a lady named Ellen Campbell. And later on, we're going to find out that the Campbell family was very instrumental in the creation of Mill Valley. So here's the descendancy going down from James and Virginie, and it goes down. And the guy at the bottom, which I have added, Paul William DeFremery Jr., he married a lady named Mary. In 1946, they settled in Mill Valley and raised 2 children here in Mill Valley. Their daughter Ann was a classmate of mine in 8th grade and graduated from town the same year I did. So I never would have imagined that my classmate Ann DeFremery was descended from a slave. I mean, they had not, going down, they had not married black people, so they got progressively whiter. And anyway, here's Virginie and James about 1870, and this would have been about the time that James connected with Lovell White at the San Francisco Savings Union. Here's another portrait of Virginie. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation. And here's a ad shortly after the San Francisco Savings Union was formed. Now, the San Francisco Savings Union was the organization that Lovell White joined after he left William Ralston in 1870. Now, the union itself was founded in 1862, and it was quite revolutionary. The Federal Reserve website says that the Savings Union was the first bank in the United States to make a loan to a woman anywhere. So if you, I don't know if you can read this, but up at the top you see James DeFremery, Vice President Albert Miller. Does he ring a bell to anybody? Miller Avenue, perhaps, Miller Avenue. So we'll talk a little bit more about Albert. So here's James, about 1870. And here's Albert Miller. This is from a painting that's hanging in the Bancroft Library at UC Berkeley. He was a UC Berkeley regent in 1887 and then served all from 1890 to 1900 when he died. And apparently he did a lot for the University of California as well as Mill Valley. He was very prominent in the lead up and the establishment of Mill Valley, and that's why we have Miller Avenue. And one of the things, other things that the San Francisco Savings Union did was they allowed, now if a woman was married up until this time, you could not, she had to open a bank account under her husband's name. If she was a single woman, she could open her own bank account, but if she was married, she could not. And minors couldn't have bank accounts at all. The San Francisco Savings Union, looks like there's a termite, flying termite. Not a good sign. Anyway. It's distracting. So it was an extremely progressive organization run by very progressive people. And then here's an ad from a few years later with James DeFremery and Lovell White. And then James died in 1899, and three of his pallbearers were also directors of the Tamalpais Land and Water Company, which ran Mill Valley at the time. And let's see if I can get the pointer thing to work here. Oops, wrong button. Albert Miller, Lovell White, and Henry C. Campbell. Henry C. Campbell was a Tamalpais Land and Water Company director and part of the Campbell family. Here's Alexander Campbell, the father of Henry Campbell. He was a very close friend of James DeFremery, and in fact, even though I can't read this book in Dutch, his name, I can see his name in it in quite a few places. There's a lot of history that would be really nice for us to know if we could get it published in English. And Alexander, he lived long enough to be involved in this 1880s lead up, which I better hurry and get to. And here's one of the lead up things which I'll explain more about if I have time. You can see A. Campbell Sr., Albert Miller, again, another Alexander Campbell, and his sons Donald and Henry were also big in the lead up to establishment of Mill Valley. Donald was a charter member of the Sierra Club too. Now here's an event that occurred at the Virginia and James DeFremery home in Oakland. Is still there. It's part of DeFremery Park, and it has quite a history. And because of this best-selling book, the then Prime Minister of the Netherlands, there on the right, visited the DeFremery house in last December. His name is Mark Rutte. He was Prime Minister of the Netherlands from 2010 to July 2024, and just within the last day or two, he was elected Secretary General of NATO. So he is unveiling a picture of Virginie DeFremery, James' wife. Whoops, wrong direction. What's happening here? Okay. Huh. Okay, here we go. So here's some more pictures from the dedication. Oakland Mayor Sheng Tao, the other two people I don't know, and Mark Ruta again with her picture. Okay, another. No, it's the same one. I've got to figure out. Okay, I see which way. And here's another part of it. You'll see the picture of Virginia and James, an old picture of the house. And the DeFremery House was once a rally and hangout point of the Black Panther Party in the 1960s and 1970s. Now, that's, I think, such a cool connection with Mill Valley. Another picture. Here's a nice one of him interacting with some of the kids who hang out there. And here's their history wall. I don't think there's any Mill Valley stuff, but I like to go there sometime, although it's said that it's not in a particularly safe area. So it's nice that we're part of our history is very famous in the Netherlands, and hopefully it eventually becomes famous here. So this is Paul William DeFremery Jr. and his wife Mary when they got married in 1946, and they later lived on Lovell, kind of ironically, Lovell Avenue in Mill Valley, had a son Peter and a daughter Anne. They have both passed away, and Anne has passed away. Peter apparently lives in Larkspur. Okay, now we move to our final section, and I think we're just going to make it. So this is where I'll try to talk about a little bit about who might be in this picture that I haven't already mentioned. Oh, hang on here. So Sidney Cushing, this guy, Louis or Louis Janes, I don't know how he pronounces it, Janes, and there's a Janes Street in Homestead Valley. He was a very important and prime mover early on. He was bald. I haven't seen pictures of him with a mustache, but I think that's Louis Janes. This might be Albert Miller, and the rest I don't really know. Could be a couple of the gardeners. And oh, wait, I do know one more. This is Charles Dowd, who had the Dowd stables. Now, not the younger Charles Irving Dowd, but Charles Irving Dowd's father. So there's three of them we're pretty sure of. And here's a view of Lovell White when he was a little younger than most of the pictures you see. This was from a book on the history of Newport, New Hampshire, where he was born, published in 1878. And here's a picture from the Examiner. The Examiner seemed to like him, probably because I guess William Randolph Hearst, who owned the Examiner, must have liked Lovell White as well. Only view of him I've seen wearing glasses. Here's one of our portraits from the Lucretia Little History Room that I like. It kind of shows his, I think, his gentleness, also his ears and hair. And here's a brief bio from the 1878 history of Newport, New Hampshire bio. So his father was Nathan. Lovell was named after his uncle, Lovell Wheeler, and he had a business in Newport, and then went to Iowa. You probably can read this, so maybe you can read faster than I'm telling you. When he was in Des Moines, he became quite prominent in the town, both in banking and in local politics. And it was there he met Laura Lyon and married her shortly before they came to California. The one interesting thing here is it says about halfway down, let's see if I can find it here again. It says 1865. He lived in where are they showing? It doesn't say what he lived in the Sierra in a town called French Corral, and then in 1868 he became a manager of the Bank of California. In actuality, from 1864 to 1868, he was basically a secret agent for William Ralston and doing under stuff behind the scenes and under the table for William Ralston. And we do have evidence that he and Laura were actually in San Francisco in 1864. And this California and Colorado Steam Navigation Company thing you see halfway down, that was basically a cover story. He may have done something for him, but it wasn't his main thing. So I'm going back here, and again, going back to show the family here. Eliza Bonner, Jonathan Lyon. And I'm also going to talk about, down here at the bottom, a guy named Samuel Tyler. And Robert Allen, which is up there about halfway up. Now, Robert Allen and Samuel Tyler, I call them the fairy godfathers because they seem to be touched everybody they ran into. Here's a picture of Robert Allen. He served in the Mexican War, and he was a chief quartermaster of the Pacific Coast, quartermaster being the Army guy who supplies the forts with provisions and armaments, etc. And during the Civil War, he became head of chief quartermaster for the entire Mississippi Valley and supplied the armies that were going into the South from the West, including Sherman's army. Well, what is quite interesting is that Robert Allen, while he was an army officer, he also was allowed to do things on the side, and he liked to invest and get involved in mines. So here's a article from 1858, and it talks about a stagecoach going from San Francisco to Yuma, Arizona. And that would be a heck of a long stagecoach ride. So one of Robert Allen's companions in that long stable lives was a guy named Dr. Cushing. And that was, and I've confirmed this with Tim Wood, who was Dr. Cushing's great-great-grandson, that Cushing had an interest in this mine in Arizona. So Robert Allen, Laura White's relative and benefactor, was in a stagecoach with a Cushing. So these two families knew each other very early on. Now, during the Civil War, Robert Allen was getting supplies to the Union Army, and one of the companies he bought from was A.E. Kenton Company in Chicago. They packed salt pork. If you've ever heard of pork barrels, these are pork barrels. Basically, they took pork, put it in barrels, packed it in salt, and sealed it, and it would usually keep without refrigeration. So the Kents made a lot of money off the U.S. Selling this barreled pork to the Union Army. And it's ironic that Robert Allen, the Lovell White family member, helped the Kent family get rich, and A. Kent's son was a guy named William Kent, who some of you have probably heard of. So in 1858, probably in the fall, Laura and Lovell White left Iowa, probably went down the Mississippi, took a boat to Panama, crossed Panama, and came up to San Francisco. Laura was probably pregnant with her first child, which is one reason why they did not take a wagon train. So Lovell tried to get a banking job in San Francisco, failed, and somebody must have told him about this area in the Sierra Nevada that's on this map. This is an area just north of Interstate 80 in the Sierra foothills, Sierra and Interstate 80 going, of course, from Sacramento to Reno, Tahoe. So they settled in by early 1859 in a town named French Corral, which you can probably see there. It's toward the bottom. And that is kind of ironic because Laura White was fluent in French, and she was born in a town called French Lick, Indiana, and then they settled in French Corral in the Sierra Nevada. And her son Ralston White was also fluent in French. Now, I don't know whether they had any French ancestry. On Laura's mother's side, the Bonners were of Scottish ancestry. So here's a French Corral, which is now a ghost town, and nearby is the Bridgeport, which was the township. It was called Bridgeport Township Covered Bridge. A couple of miles to the north is the Colgate Powerhouse, which if you know our local railroad history, you'll be familiar with. And then up at the top, there's also probably a ghost town, a place called Dobbins, and the nearest existing town of North San Juan up toward the upper right. And then Highway 49, which goes through the Mother Lode, and this is in the Mother Lode. So that you see that name Dobbins at the top. And it was a place settled by the Dobbins brothers, William and Mark. And it turned out that William and Mark were nephews of Daniel Dobbins, who provided the land for the integrated schoolhouse at Wellsville in 1800. And it interested me that the progressivism in the family came through to this nephew who learned the local Indian tongue and helped prevent an Indian war. Now, here they call the Indians diggers, and that was a very derogatory term. It was probably kind of equivalent to the N-word used with another racial group. But he, at least, even though he. And then here's the area which was called Bridgeport Township in 1856, the first Republican convention. And you see Samuel Tyler, who I mentioned at the bottom, and then a little bit further up, you'll see a John Archibald. And it was a John Archibald that Lovell White replaced as cashier at the San Francisco Savings Union. Not anything we're going to read, except that it was talking about Tyler, who was known as Captain Tyler, being involved in the Arizona copper mine. So both fairy godfathers, Tyler and anyway, it's my brain. So here's a picture of French Corral, not a very good one, and hydraulic mining was the big thing there. Here's a picture of the Bridgeport Covered Bridge, which is said to be the longest span existing covered bridge in the world. Here's the 1860 census for French Corral. You'll see toward the bottom there, Lovell White in the red box, merchant. And I don't know if you can see further down here. I won't go down that far. Laura, and at the very bottom is Isabella, which was their firstborn, born in California. And then above is Lyon White, which was Lovell's younger brother. And one of Elon's daughters was named Edith. And she later became a famous artist who was one of the first graduates of Mills College and settled in Berkeley. And here's a picture of her painting a picture of a young girl who old people like me will know who that is. And then all the histories you see will say that Lovell and Laura lost two children, but they actually lost three. This one at the top, this is Isabel, published in the Hydraulic Press, which was it's a newspaper only recently put online. Isabel died of diphtheria, and Barry Spitz in his book says that the other two died of scarlet fever. Now, the other two died in 1864 in San Francisco. So the Whites were in San Francisco by 1864. And then when you worked for a presidential candidate, you worked hard for them, you could be granted as a reward, a postmaster job. So in 1861, Lovell White got the postmaster job for French Corral. So guess who he was for in the 1860 election? Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln won California by 700 votes. And Lovell White was the town merchant in French Corral. And I imagine he had time to talk to quite a few people. So he must have made a significant difference. There's our little friend again. And then Lovell White being what he was, he and Laura would always pretty much take over any community they lived in. He became the local road overseer in 1852. He didn't get charge of the covered bridge because the covered bridge was run by a private toll road company, and they mention that exception here. So Lovell, unfortunately, in Des Moines, he apparently lost everything, and at French Corral, he apparently lost everything, and at French Corral, he lost it in the Kanaka mine near Downeyville. And here's another, or court cave, Lovell White, an insolvent debtor. So with the death of the last two children in late 1864 and his bankruptcy, Lovell and Laura had hit bottom. So I'm going to go back to William Ralston again, and mentioning here that Lovell White was the main stock guy, under the table stock guy for Ralston, what I showed you earlier. And then in May 1870, Lovell White got a job with the San Francisco Savings Union and immediately started advertising. They tended to work with small middle class homeowners and farmers. This I also showed you before. And then as the Lovell and Laura were pulling out of their demise, in 1868, a literary magazine called the Overland Monthly was started. And it was a progressive literary magazine, the first and best of its kind in California. The other literary magazines were all on the East Coast. And in 1871, the male editor resigned, and the publisher named Carmody hired a woman to act as a kind of a temporary editor. And right after that, Laurel and Lovell started getting numerous stories published in the Overland Monthly. 6 short stories for Laura, 1 factual story by Lovell, and 2 short stories by Lovell. I don't think they were great writers. And at the same time, another guy named John Muir entered the picture and published his first work in California. And they, obviously, I think they all got to know each other at that time. I'm going to try to rush here because we may not have a question period. So the lady who was probably running things was this lady who later became a very strong advocate for saving the redwoods of Santa Cruz County and the Sempervirens Club, and was involved with Laura in that organization. And here's mentioning John Muir. And John Muir, it turned out that he was the best friend of a guy named Thomas McGee, who was a founding director of the Tamalpais Land and Water Company. And the two of them enjoyed cross-country skiing in the High Sierra. And I never knew until now that John Muir was a skier. That's so cool. And actually, John Muir and Thomas McGee climbed Half Dome, which is there on the left, in the 1870s when it was a very, very challenging and risky ascent. Lovell was also involved with the California Academy of Sciences and there was a Lovell White Hall in the last Academy of Sciences that was torn down about 20 years ago. In 1970, Samuel Throckmorton, who took over the Sausalito Rancho from William Richardson, became a founding member of the California Fish Commission. Throckmorton was very much a conservationist, close friends with B.B. Redding, who was just to his left there. And Redding was a leader in the California Academy of Sciences. They were both prominent fishermen and were concerned about fish stocks in California. And this contributed to Throckmorton wanting to preserve his ranch rather than develop it, and why he tried to hang on to it so long. So in 1881, Throckmorton had terrible financial problems. We'll be wrapping up pretty soon, hopefully 5 minutes. And he mortgaged the Throckmorton Ranch to a guy named Alfred A. Cohen. And I'm not gonna be able to really talk about him, but he was extremely prominent. Throckmorton defaulted on the mortgage, and Cohen took him to court and forced a sheriff's auction of the Throckmorton Ranch. This 1881 auction was missed by Barry Spitz and others. So this is part of our new information. And Throckmorton had 6 months he could buy it back. And he did. Where did he get that $147,000 from? This is an explanation of what was the Horace P. James lawsuit. Horace P. James was the father of Lewis James. James had obtained a promissory note which required Throckmorton to give up a fifth of the Throckmorton Ranch plus a fifth of the income from that ranch. He sued Throckmorton, and eventually in 1883, the James family won the lawsuit. Horace had long since died. And the court decision was that, and Throckmorton himself had died, and his daughter, Susanna Throckmorton, had taken over the ranch. The court decision required that Susanna give up 3,700 acres of the ranch. This top paragraph, Albert Miller and A. Camlo Sr. were these trustees. They were in charge of foreclosures. They would auction off land that the San Francisco Savings Union had a mortgage on. So Throckmorton had gotten the $147,000 from the San Francisco Savings Union. So these are San Francisco Saving Union giving up their interest, and Susanna turning over 33,700 acres to the Janes family. Now, immediately after the Janes family acquired that 3,700 acres, they sold it off to a bunch of undercover buyers, a guy named Turney, Don Hill, Meredith, Craig, and Holland, for example. And then Lovell White bought it back. So Lovell White started acquiring this 3,700 acres, which basically it was almost all the land in the ranch that didn't include the dairy leases. So it was basically the Chaparral south slope of Mount Tamalpais into the valleys a little bit, possibly including parts of Mill Valley and possibly including parts of Muir Woods. We haven't found a map with an exact of that 3,700 acres. It was called Lot D. Here's another one Lovell White got, 647 acres. Here's some more. So Lovell White was under the table acquiring the ranch, Throckmorton Ranch, long before 1889. So not only did the San Francisco Savings Union have a mortgage with Susanna on the rest of the ranch, they were outright acquiring parts of it years before 1889. So here's what happened in 89. So Susanna turned over her share to Donald Campbell, who was working for the San Francisco Savings Union, and Lovell White was turning over his 3,700 acres also, and then Henry Campbell, who was apparently working with Lucy Thayer, who I think was a member of the Janes camp. They basically all turned it over to the Tamalpais Land and Water Company. And here's an explanation, which you can read. But all the sources, including Barry, say that the mortgage was $100,000. It was actually $252,000. And there's multiple confirmations of that. The original directors, Joseph G. Eastland, he came in because he had cash. The rest of them had land, but they didn't have cash. Lovell White had contributed his land. Thomas McGee, John Muir's best friend, Louis Janes and the Janes family, and Henry Campbell. And then, I don't know if I should skip this, but yeah, we need to wrap it up. So you can see this stuff later, but Lovell White was pushing for what was called the People's Railroad to break the back of the Southern Pacific's monopoly, and that led to the Tamalpais Railway. Basically, that was the impetus for the Tamalpais Railway, his interest in that in the mid-1890s. This is Lovell White. Here's a picture of her at 16. At the age she ran away from home and hid out for 2 months eating wild foods. And in 1901, she started working for preservation of the sequoias in the Sierra with a lady on the right was Charlotte Sharon, wife of Alexander Dumas Sharon of the Palace Hotel. In 1901, this was William Kent's first proposal for a Tamalpais National Park. And in 1903, they established a National Park Association. A lot of this is in books, and a lot of stuff like the auction I'm not talking about because so much is not. These are the officers of the Tamalpais National Park Association, and I noted that 4 of them were charter members of the Sierra Club, and there's a lot of things I could tell you about these people that I won't. And then when Muir Woods became a reality in the beginning of 1908, Laura got her picture above William Kent. That's how important she was. Here's William Kent and John Muir at Muir Woods. And something that Laura White said, nature has set no permanent or eternal stamp of superiority on any race or sex. And then this is the end. You won't be able to see this too clearly, but this is a full page of Emmanuel, which was a San Francisco Jewish publication. The ad on the right side is an ad for the San Francisco Savings Union, published 2 weeks before Lovell White died. And it expresses his reaching out to minority groups. There's somebody in the audience who knows a Mill Valley Chinese merchant named Sui Ki Hong. And Sui Ki Hong kept his money in the San Francisco Savings Union. And with that, I conclude. Thank you very much. Sorry it took so long.